South Bend Mayor Pete Buttigieg. Mayor, welcome back to Fox News Sunday.
Good morning. Thanks for having me.
After the terrible shooting in El Paso yesterday, you said that this country is under attack from homegrown, violent, white nationalism. Explain, sir.
Well, this is terrorism, and we have to name it as such. It is very clear that the loss of American life in Charleston, in San Diego, in Pittsburgh, by all appearances now in El Paso, too, is symptomatic of the effects of white nationalist terrorism. We cannot keep America safe from this threat to the American people if we're not prepared to name it and confront it. We need an administration that is ready to do that, and we can't keep pretending that this is just random or that this is something we can't confront. What you have here is two things coming together. One, the weak gun safety policies of this country, and two, the rise of domestic terrorism inspired by white nationalists. We need to acknowledge that this is a problem, that American lives are at risk, and we got to do something about it.
At least one of the other Democratic presidential candidates, Beto O'Rourke, has said that President Trump and his rhetoric bear some responsibility for the acts of this madman. Do you think that's fair?
Well, there's no question that white nationalism is condoned at the highest levels of our government. You know, when this kind of rhetoric happened 20 years ago, when David Duke was trying to run for office as a Republican, the Republican Party was horrified. They couldn't run away fast enough. Right now, you see it being echoed by the White House, and there is a measure of responsibility that you just can't get away from when you have, you know, case after case of racial rhetoric coming out of the White House. And then when you have an actual incident of white nationalist terrorism like the killing in Charlottesville related to people saying Jews will not replace us, and the president saying he got very fine people there, of course this is part of a climate where people who are in the grip of this hateful extremist ideology feel validated, and they feel validated from all the way at the top, and that is part of our problem.
After each mass shooting, there is a debate. I mean, we almost know how this is going to play, a debate about what can we do, if anything, to stop it. We know very little about the specifics of either of these cases, Dayton or El Paso, who the shooters were, how they got their guns, but any thoughts about how you could potentially stop these kinds of mass killings?
Well, you're right. After every mass shooting, we say, how long till the next one? And in this case, the answer was a matter of hours. Sooner or later, we've got to face up to the fact that we live in the only country in the world with more guns than people, and the only country in the world where this happens all the time. We cannot allow the Second Amendment to be a death sentence for thousands of Americans a year, nor can we say there's nothing to be done when we live in the only country where this is routine. Now, the amazing thing to me is that most Americans, most gun owners, most Republicans believe we should at least have universal background checks, red flag laws that disarm domestic abusers and help us identify cases where there's a mental health risk. And even that cannot get through this Congress, cannot get through this Senate. It shows you that the NRA no longer speaks for gun owners, it speaks for gun corporations. And it shows you that Washington has been captured by special interests that no longer reflect the American people. I was in high school when the Columbine shooting happened. These debates have been going on my entire adult life, and nothing has changed. We have to ask ourselves as a country if we're really willing to allow this to continue, or if we will take some steps to save American lives.
It is tough to discuss politics on a weekend like this, but the race goes on, so I'm going to ask you about it. Since the last time we talked, Mayor, your campaign seems to have stalled a bit. I want to put up some numbers. In the latest CBS News poll in Iowa, you're now at 7%, down from 11% in June. In New Hampshire, you're now at 7%, down from 10% in June. What's happened?
We're not following 3 or 4% swings in polls 8 months out from when the voting takes place. What we know is that we've established a position in the top tier of candidates, and now's the part where it really turns into a distance race. The blast off happened, you know, the launch took place. We're a long way from the finish line. This is where you do the sometimes not very glamorous work of building the organizations on the ground that are going to deliver us to victory in the early states. Our message is resonating. Our organization is growing, and we're going to take the resources that we gathered when we led the Democratic field in the last quarter and now use them, as we're doing on the ground in Iowa, where we got 57 people on the ground last time I checked, and all of the early states as well as headquarters, to mount the organization that's going to make it possible for us to win.
One thing that has happened since we last talked to you and since this dip in the polls is that a white policeman killed a black man in your city of South Bend, Indiana in June. You went off the campaign trail at that point for a few days to deal with the outrage in your community. Take a look.
Get the racists off the streets. It's disrespectful that I wake up every day scared.
If anyone who is on patrol is shown to be a racist or to do something racist in a way that is substantiated, that is their last day on the street.
We have seen a lot of mayors and public officials step into situations like that, and there was widespread criticism after you went back to South Bend that you showed more head than heart there. And in a new Quinnipiac national poll of African Americans, it shows that you have 0% support, zero, in the black community. Your response?
So we're getting a very good response in the black community to the policy ideas I put forward. But what you saw there and what we're dealing with at home is this wall of mistrust between law enforcement and between black residents. It is a huge issue. It is not unique to South Bend, but we are working through the pain of that issue in South Bend right now. The reality is the badge has a history, and even the best human being ever to put on the uniform is burdened by that history and by what's happening around the country that has so many black Americans questioning if they can trust police. We have got to deal with this as a country, and accountability measures make a difference, but also we got to recognize that this has to do with deeper issues of systemic racism in this country, that as long as experiencing the economy, experiencing health care is completely different for black Americans, which is still true. You can tell. It's in the numbers. You know, the fact that a black patient is less likely to have their reports of pain taken seriously when they go into an ER, the fact that a black job applicant is less likely to have a call back on a resume, even an identical resume, just if the name is considered characteristically black, shows you that these issues have created two countries. And policing and criminal justice is part of a bigger pattern.
Beyond those kind of big systemic issues, one of the specific complaints about your term as mayor in South Bend is that you have failed to put more blacks on your police force. Again, the statistics. When you started as mayor in 2012, there were 29 black police officers, or 11% of the force. Now, there are 15 black police officers on the force, or 6%, which raises the question, Mayor, if you can't put a representative number of black police officers on the police force in your city, why should blacks trust you to help them with much bigger issues across the country?
Well, the challenge of recruiting diverse officers, again, is a national challenge that has gotten even more difficult for mayors and police departments in the post-Ferguson era. There are fewer and fewer young black men and women who could ever even picture themselves wearing the uniform, but we've got to change that. As a matter of fact, we have a recruiting window open right now in South Bend, and we're continuing to work to change that. Now, in the areas where I have direct control, like appointments, for example, the Board of Safety that oversees the police department and makes discipline decisions, there is excellent minority representation. But when it comes to attracting minority applicants to police departments, including mine, we have a problem. We have a challenge, and I'm not going to shy away from it.
I got less than 2 minutes left. I want to ask you one final question. You talked in the debate, and you have talked throughout the campaign, about trying to make major structural changes to our democracy. Here you are, sir.
When I propose the actual structural democratic reforms that might make a difference, end the Electoral College, amend the Constitution if necessary to clear up Citizens United, have D.C. actually be a state, and depoliticize the Supreme Court with structural reform, people look at me funny, as if this country were incapable of structural reform.
Now, your last idea that you mentioned there was increase the size of the Supreme Court, but you got strong pushback from one particular justice. Here she is.
This court has had as few as 5, as many as 10. 9 seems to be a good number. If anything would make the court appear partisan, it would be that. One side saying, when we're in power, we're going to enlarge the number of judges, so we will have more people who will vote the way we want them to.
Ruth Bader Ginsburg says she is not at all in favor of that plan. Mayor, are you going to go up against the notorious RBG?
Well, I agree with her. What she's describing is simply adding more justices onto the court who agree with you. I don't think that would do any good. What I'm proposing is that we depoliticize the court. In other words, we set it up so that some of the justices are not chosen through the partisan political process, but instead are chosen by a consensus among the others. Now, practically, the only way I see to do this would be to have a 15-member court, but there may be other models that can be followed. There's actually an article in the Yale Law Journal coming out on how to do this. Look, the bottom line is this system is not working for us. The court is coming to be viewed as a nakedly political institution, and we need to depoliticize it. Remember, the structure and makeup of the court has changed many times over the years, but what we have right now is utter bad faith on the part of the Senate Republican majority. Mitch McConnell made it a matter of principle in 2016 that you could not have a nominee in an election year, effectively changing the number of justices to 8, then changed it back to 9 when they took power, and now says in an election year in 2020, it would be no problem to hold a vote. That means he's not even pretending to be acting in good faith. This has become completely political in the hands of this Senate. We need a structural solution on that and so many other areas of our democracy where our democracy is not democratic enough. Nobody can argue that normal is all right, that it makes sense for residents, U.S. citizens in D.C. To not have the benefits of statehood. And I would argue democracy might go ahead and pick its national leader by just counting up all the votes and giving it to the person who got the most.
We are going to have more time to talk, and we have a lot more to talk with you about. Mayor, thank you so much for coming in on this very sad weekend. Thanks for your time and safe travels on the campaign trail.
Thank you for having me. See you again.